Thank you for watching this video and for coming over and checking out the channel. Welcome. I hope there's lots more to come in the future. I want to talk about Tesla stock today. I first purchased the stock in November of 2019 at approximately $350 per share. Today is the last day of 2019, December 31st, and my confidence in the company and my excitement about the stock has increased. In fact, I've added to my position as the stock has continued to climb. So I want to focus on the Robo-taxi opportunity in particular, and the reason for that is Elon Musk called this a value creation event. I think one of the biggest value creation events in history. I know that people say he can be promotional, maybe overly promotional, and there's no question that he's missed deadlines and things like that in the past. However, I think I agree with him about this potential opportunity. There are so many smart people in the stock market and so many incredibly gifted and talented people that are evaluating this stock, both on the long and the short side. But the assumption that I want to make for the time being, and I think ultimately it'll prove to be a very conservative one, but the fundamental assumption that I want to make is that the entire company exists for the time being for the sole purpose of creating robo-taxis. And so I don't want to compare them to Ford or GM or Toyota or anyone else. I just want to frame the robo-taxi opportunity and assume that all the other business endeavors amount to a wash. Again, I think that's conservative. But I think the autonomous driving opportunity alone could be worth in excess of $800 per share to Tesla shareholders. And let's get into why right now. Thank you so much for watching. Just a quick disclaimer before we get started. These are my own thoughts and opinions, so please consult your own tax preparers, financial advisors, and people like that before you make any investment or financial decisions. And also, I'm just a random person on the internet, so please take everything I say with a giant grain of Himalayan sea salt. That being said, I'm extremely excited about this opportunity, as I mentioned, and if the facts change, I'll change my mind. In terms of my own investment process, I'm still attempting to frame the opportunity, which, as I've said, I think is quite large. But let me share with you one thing that I thought was very interesting, and it has to do with the amount of news that's put out on Tesla and Elon, and the fact that so much of it is critical. I know people jumped on the fact that he said 1 million robo-taxis would be on the road by 2020. And when you actually go back and look at what he said at Autonomy Day, i.e. that the cars that were on the road at that time will be updated with new software, and that they should have about 1 million vehicles which are capable of receiving that update and performing as a fully autonomous car. I don't find that statement unreasonable. It may be aspirational and his timing may be a little bit off, but it's certainly not crazy. An over-the-air software update is something that should be achievable because Tesla has already done it lots and lots of times with lots of cars. So taking a look at the valuation, I assume $30,000 of profit per car per year. And the way that I get there is assuming 50,000 miles per year of ride-sharing miles at $1 per mile, and then 50,000 unuseful miles, basically going back to your originating destination and so forth. The 640,000 cars is, of course, a guess, and it's an estimate, but it comes from the idea that the total miles traveled in the U.S. was 3.2 trillion last year. If we capture 1% of that, that represents 32 billion miles, and at a 50% efficiency ratio, it would require 640,000 cars to service that market. If Tesla can build a fleet of 640,000 robo-taxis and they can generate $30,000 per year, then that's worth $19.2 billion in income. Over the longer term, I think this is achievable. Elon has said that eventually they want the fleet to be 10 million cars, but let's start with 640,000. So there aren't any direct comparables for what this business would be, a robo-taxi company. Maybe Uber, maybe Lyft. Those could be proxies or comps, but they don't earn any profit. So if you look at Apple or Microsoft or Google, I think a discount to those companies of around 10 times or so might be reasonable. So let's go with that. If you multiply those out, you get $192 billion of enterprise value. Then I'm assuming that they're borrowing to produce the cars. And so at a cost of $38,000 per car, and they can probably do less than that, but 640,000 cars results in $24 billion of debt. If you subtract those two, you arrive at $168 billion of implied equity value. The most recent diluted share count was 184 million, but I'm making a couple of adjustments to that. Number one, I'm adding in Elon's equity incentive or option package shares, which result in additional 20 million shares. And I'm also assuming that the company raises $4 billion of equity at a $400 share price. And that would basically be to build an additional gigafactory to produce these cars. And maybe it would take 3 or 4 years to do that. If I divide those out, I obviously get $785. I think that's conservative, and I'll tell you why. So, assuming a car can do 100,000 miles of driving in a year, and half of those are useful in terms of generating rideshare revenue, then we get to $50,000 in revenue if you use $1 a mile. Right now, Uber charges roughly $2.50. I've had rides that are higher than that, and I'm assuming in some areas, I'm in New York, I'm assuming in some areas the prices are lower than that, but $1 seems like a pretty reasonable estimate if the market right now is around $2.50. The next two numbers are taken directly from AAA that estimate electric vehicles cost roughly 3.65 cents per mile in electricity costs. I'm calling it quote unquote fuel, and about 6.6 cents a mile in maintenance costs. So if you do that out at 100,000 miles a year, you get 10,000, and so the net would be 40,000. Then I'm assuming that you pay $1,200 in insurance, $1,900 in financing costs, which I'll come back to. And there's a pretty big bucket which you can use for other, including taxes, regulations, any other fees. And I'm assuming that the insurance would be a little bit higher than the going rate for electric vehicles currently. So if you net all those things out, you arrive at a gross profit of $30,000 per year. Now, I said that the $785 price target was a little bit conservative. The reason why I say that is because I wasn't actually using EBITDA. I was using gross profit minus the $1,900 per car of financing costs. If you apply a 10 times multiple to the 640,000 cars and then add that back on a per share basis, you can add over $50 per share back to my price on the previous slide. So I think I'm being pretty conservative, but anyway, that's how I'm thinking about it. You can see here the total 12-month total vehicle miles traveled at 3.2 trillion. 1% market share may be an insanely aggressive estimate. I don't really know at this point. Uber has far less than 1% market share. According to Bloomberg, the overall rideshare plus taxi market is about 2.5% to 3% of the total U.S. miles driven. So in order for Tesla to capture 1% market share, they would need about a third of the existing market. But I think there's a good case to be made that the market could expand as well. The reason for that is if you're only paying $1 per mile, you can afford to go much further. And I think most of Uber's trips are under 30 miles. If you were to drive to New York from Boston, which is about 230 miles, and you paid $1 a mile amongst 4 people, that looks pretty favorable compared to a train ticket, driving on your own, or even a plane ticket. So I don't know. Over time, I think getting to 1% in the US isn't crazy. And of course, I'm not even thinking about the global opportunity, which is much bigger. Here's another way to think about whether or not we're drinking too much of the Tesla Kool-Aid. So if UBS thinks that by 2030, the robo-taxi industry could be worth $2 trillion, and the gross profits from what we're estimating here are $19 billion, even if our profits were, say, 50%, and so we multiplied it by 2 to get our implied revenue, and we are at $38 billion, that would imply a market share of about 1.9% based on the total industry in 2030. So it doesn't strike me as totally crazy. Morgan Stanley has been critical of Tesla in the past. One potential comparable, even though it's not publicly traded, technically, is Waymo. And if Morgan Stanley cut their valuation on Waymo to $105 billion, our numbers for Tesla may not be totally insane, or at least not ludicrous. So with all this being said, there are so many risks to this thesis and to the valuation and to Tesla as a whole. Leaving aside for a second the execution risk and the demand questions, as well as competition, this may not be anything that the regulators are interested in approving for years and years and years. And so to some degree, it is speculative, but I also think that eventually robotaxis are inevitable. They're safer, they're more efficient, they're cheaper, they're more environmentally friendly, and Tesla seems to be far ahead of the competition in almost every respect. But I could be wrong. I don't know. Let me know what you think. Leave me a comment. Tell me if you disagree with anything or everything that I'm doing. I'd appreciate it. I know Elon Musk is a controversial character, but if you look back at 2012 and you compare what he said he would do to what he did do, he essentially blew his targets out of the water, and he was rewarded handsomely for that in the form of shares of Tesla. The latest incentive compensation scheme gives Elon 20 million shares if he can execute on a number of milestones. One of perhaps the most important ones being reaching 650 billion in market cap, which of course means the stock would be a lot higher than here and a lot higher than 800. So that would be good. Because at the end of 2019, Tesla is run rating at approximately 500,000 vehicles per year, I don't think setting aside 640,000 vehicles for the Robo-taxi fleet over the next couple of years is crazy at all. That reminds me, I didn't do an NPV on the $800 per share that I'm arriving at. I don't know exactly when they'll hit this milestone, but if the company can 10x production from here over the next 5 years, that would imply over 5 million vehicles, and 640,000 based on that number would be totally achievable. Thank you so much for watching. Leave me a comment below whether you liked it or hated it or whatever. I hope to make lots more videos, and I'll see you soon. Thank you.